Thank you. So plants by habitat is the topic for tonight's session. And I've put together 100 plants in 2026 challenge around the idea of plants and their habitats. So just to start with, what does that really mean? What are we talking about? Well, plants that share ecological requirements and adaptations tend to grow together to form what we term communities. Some of the things that affect this, the ecological requirements, could be the type of bedrock, the soil pH, whether there's groundwater movement, what the temperature is, how disturbed they are, and a whole host of other things there on my slide. And these plant communities that, along with the other ecological features, make up the broader kind of habitat types, like woodland and grassland, that we all recognize quite easily. Now, learning a relatively small set of indicator species can be incredibly helpful and a fast-track way to start recognizing the different plant communities and habitats that they make up, and understand the ecology of a site in a much deeper way. I think it's kind of like learning to read a new language, the language of a site, its history, its management, and so forth. Now, the story of plant communities in Britain, and I will be talking about Britain, I'm afraid, because I am from Britain, but everything applies to Ireland as well, I hope. So yeah, the story of plant communities in Britain is a really interesting one across the 19th century, bookended by Arthur Tansley, who published The Types of British Vegetation in 1911. He's sort of thought of as the father of ecology here in Britain. And fast forward to the 90s, and you have this 5-volume set of British plant communities published, led by John Rodwell. And that developed the National Vegetation Classification, the NVC, which looked to name and describe all of these different plant communities. It's an absolute whopper of a book, and definitely not for the faint-of-hearted or for beginners. But fortunately, since then, lots of publications have come out talking about plants and their habitats and helping to make sense of it for botanists at the start of their career. And I would recommend this one, Plants and Habitats by Ben Averis, in the right of my slide, which introduces common plants and their habitats across Britain and Ireland. I think it's a very good sort of starter and a good ID book as well. So what are we going to do in this challenge tonight? We're going to hit our way through 60 species in 60 minutes, a few minutes less now because I've been waffling. We're going to go across 8 broad habitat types: urban, farmland, woodland, grassland, peatlands, wetlands, coasts, and mountains. Within those broad habitat types, we're going to look at plants from 20 individual habitats. So, for example, we're narrowing it down to acid grassland or wet woodland or dry heath, sand dunes. And we should hopefully get through 60 of these characteristic indicator species of plant communities found in each of these habitats. So if you're ready, then off we go. So we're going to start in the urban landscape because it's very familiar to most of us and on our front doorstep. And of course, the habitats in urban areas are disturbed. The plants are frequently changing, and we get lots of non-native species coming in. And these conditions in urban areas are ideal for annuals, plants that set seed once and then die, and their seed survives in the seed bank. We tend to call these the non-botanical term of weeds. Weeds are wonderful. So you have waste ground, pavements, walls, car parks, amenity areas, all sorts of habitats within the urban area. And in fact, many arable weeds are now easier to find in urban habitats than they are in their original arable fields, which of course are now often very intensively managed with herbicides. So on to our first plant, probably a very familiar one. This is groundsel, a member of the daisy family. But it's lost the outer petals, the outer ray florets, and it's just left with the yellow florets in the middle. So it does still form a kind of dandelion clock, as you can see on the left of each each little seed type structure with a little parachute. And the name, the scientific name of the genus of this species, Senecio, derives from senex, which is the Greek for old man, because when the wind blows the top off the little clock, it looks like a bald-headed, bearded old man, which I think is rather nice. Now, another plant very common in urban areas is this one, pineapple weed. And again, this is a member of the daisy family that's lost its outer ray florets, and it just has these little disc florets in there. By florets, I mean, if you look at this triangular cone-shaped flower here, each one of those little bubbles you can see is actually a little tiny flower of itself. We call it a composite flower. Anyway, this one, this pineapple weed, the leaves are much more dissected, much more sort of feathered than the groundsel. And if you squish it, it smells very strongly of pineapple, which is a great giveaway. It's not actually a native plant. This one came over from North America, and it escaped from Kew Gardens in 1869. And then since then, spread absolutely everywhere. And it's probably one of the fastest spreading plants of the 20th century. Should be a fairly easy one to find. And I've thrown in a grass. I am going to throw in the odd grass and sedge and rush because they're integral parts of a lot of habitats. This grass, annual meadowgrass, is probably the commonest urban grass growing on pavements and in cracks and on waste ground. It's a poa, the genus of poa, and as you can see, the tips of the leaves are kind of blunt and canoe-shaped or boat-shaped, and that's a really good distinction for this genus, a sort of boat-shaped leaf tip. And this species, the annual meadowgrass, has the characteristic little wrinkles in the leaf, as well as a fairly tall ligule, this little area of membrane at the base of the leaf. Here it is growing very flat, can cope with a lot of trampling, but it will grow upright as well. So moving from the pavements and the trampled areas onto the walls, this is ivy-leaved toadflax. It's a very common wall plant. Again, not originally a British native, it's from South Europe originally. And it gets its name from its ivy-shaped leaf, more or less. But that should be a very easy one to spot on the walls around where you live. The walls in urban areas, of course, also support ferns, and there are two very common ones. This one is maidenhair spleenwort, with a very distinctive black wiry stem or rachis, and the leaf-like bits, the pinnae, in pairs going up the stem. And here it is growing on the mortar in a brick wall, absolutely classic. Spleenwort gets its name, incidentally, from the doctrine of signatures, which was an old way of thinking that if a plant or a feature looked like something, then it could be used to treat that thing. And the sori, which hold the spores on the underside of the leaf, are shaped like a spleen, hence spleenwort. It was thought it could treat ailments of the spleen. Here is wall rue, another of the spleenwort family that's very common on urban walls. As you can see, it's not, the frond is quite a different shape, it's much more branched. And this is a view on the right here looking at the underside, and you can see all of those sori, the brown kind of fluffy things. And within those, within the sori, there's a structure called the sporangia, and inside there are the spores, and they get released out and get distributed by the wind and help the ferns to spread. So moving from the urban to the rural now, out into the countryside. In farmland, there are a huge range of different habitats that mainly depend on the prevailing land use. So you could have silage or arable cropping, livestock grazing, etc. And arable field margins were traditionally really important for many of our ancient introductions, known as archaeophytes. that arrived on our shore more than 500 years ago, usually or quite often with the introduction of agriculture. And some of them are very familiar and much loved, like common poppy, cornflower, corn marigold. Many of these arable field margin species are now threatened because of the intensification of agriculture, improved seed cleaning techniques and herbicide use. This little chap is still widespread. This is the red dead nettle with these lovely flowers with drooping lips and little hood over the top, nice furry leaves, but they don't sting. They're a dead nettle, no stings, hence the name. The flowers really are pink rather than red, and that's quite an interesting feature, which is that the word pink wasn't used to describe colour until the 17th century. So flowers were named red because pink as a colour didn't exist. And pink was only coined as a colour name based on a group of plants called the pinks. And pinking was the word actually meant to decorate with a little pattern, like pinking shears in modern use. So we don't have a pink dead nettle, we have a red dead nettle, and you'll find that happens again and again. Another lovely arable weed is this guy, the corn spurry. Look for beautiful little white stars, 5-petaled stars pricking out. And if you notice, the leaves are quite fleshy, and they're also arranged in whorls around the stem, which is quite distinctive when you see it. And as I said, a lot of arable weeds are threatened. This, I think, is nationally vulnerable. Despite being widespread, it's declined a lot. And here, of course, is common poppy, another archaeophyte to the ancient introduction. And you may be familiar with the way that after disturbance or a change in land use, you can suddenly get a whole field just plastered, covered in poppies, because the seeds are very long-lived. So all the plants are annual. The seeds hang around for years in the seed bank, waiting for the right opportunity. So you can get these big flushes of poppies. In the inset photo, the seed heads here are quite kind of short and stumpy, and that's an important identification feature for this species of poppy, because we also have the long-headed poppy, which is quite common as well, but the seed head is elongated, much taller. So look out for that when you're spotting a poppy. Another group of habitats in farmland, of course, are the improved grasslands, the silage fields and whatnot that have been seeded with different grasses, usually sort of agriculturally productive ones that have high nutrition value for fodder and so forth. And this is the dominant one in many places, perennial ryegrass. It's actually quite an interesting looking plant. It's got a flattened inflorescence with spikelets on either side going up alternately, and within each of these spikelets is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 flowers maybe in there. Here they are opened, and you can see that grasses are indeed flowering plants. Here are the male anthers, the male part of the flowers sticking out there. And a really easy way to spot it when you're driving past or whatever on a sunny day is if you see a field of grass and it looks shiny, it's reflecting back, then it's going to be perennial ryegrass. The underside of the leaves are very shiny, and that's a nice way to tell it even out of season when it's not in flower. Also very common in these kind of habitats is white clover. It's got the classic trefoil leaf, usually with a white pattern or mark on it. Not very hairy. If it's very hairy, it's more likely to be the red clover. A white clustered flower head, lots of different flowers in there. Each one's an individual flower. A member of the pea family, so it has the bottom petal there is fused together to make a boat shape or a keel. Then you have 2 wings on either side, there and there, and an erect standard at the top there. So a unique shape of flower to the peas. White clover is planted as seeded in these agricultural grasslands very often because it's a nitrogen fixer. The roots have got nodules which contain nitrogen fixing bacteria, so they help the soil maintain its value for cropping. And another very familiar plant, I'm sure, is creeping buttercup. Buttercup with the lovely yellow flowers, and you can see from this photograph how it's creeping along. The stems go sideways and then root, and you get another plant. If you've ever tried to pull it out of your garden, you'll soon realize what a clever, well-adapted thing it is. The leaves are three-part. They've got sort of two basal parts there and a terminal part, and that's a good distinguisher between it and the very similar meadow buttercup. The meadow buttercup's leaves are much more palmate. They're much more with the 5 pieces of leaf radiating from the center rather than in that 3 pattern. So on to the next broad habitat type. We've got woodland. Now, our woodlands are the result of centuries of human interventions. We felled them, we grazed them with livestock, we coppiced them, we replanted them, we've introduced new species of tree. So all kinds of things have gone on in our remaining woodlands. So they can be quite complicated to understand the history of a site. You tend to get different assemblages, different groupings of trees and ground flora with different soil conditions. And very simply, on dry acid soils, you tend to get canopies with birch and oak, Scots pine or beech, depending on where you are in the country, with dwarf shrubs like heather and so forth growing on the ground. More neutral dry soils, you get some similar plants, but also rowan and holly, hazel. Further south, you might get sweet chestnut and hornbeam. And now the understory is starting to, the field layer is starting to get more diverse with bluebells and honeysuckle, wood anemone, and so forth. In areas where the soils are less acid and more basic, the pH is above 7, you tend to find trees like ash and the elms and sycamore, hazel and lime, and in the south, field maple. And the ground flora is often very different now with Dog's Mercury, Woodhaven, Sanico, and so forth, Ramsons. A very classic sort of lush green woodland ground flora. And then you also have wet woodlands, where the canopy tends to be made of willows and birches and alders. The ground is obviously usually wet, saturated, and the plants you get on the ground are different depending on whether it's acid or more basic. So I'm going to skip the dry acid woodlands because we'll do the heathers and so forth later. And I'll move on to the neutralish kind of woodlands. And of course, we've got bluebell, classic plant. But you need to make sure that the ones you're looking at are the real deal. So if you want the true native bluebell, you're looking for something that tends to curve over, and each bell is more or less parallel-sided or sort of nipping in slightly, not opening wide. And the flowers are all mostly on the same side of the plant, so it's asymmetric. And here the anthers, the male bits of the flower, are white and not blue. And if you find that they're blue and the flowers are pointing in all the different directions, you've probably got the introduced Spanish bluebell, or alternatively a hybrid. So if you have a bluebell in an urban area or near gardens, it's worth checking very carefully, just in case. This is another fantastic early season flower. A lot of woodland plants tend to flower early in the year before the tree's leaves come out, so they can still make use of the sun. This is wood anemone. It's a terrific flower. What you're looking at there, those 6 white structures, aren't actually petals. They are the sepals, and the petals are reduced down into near nothingness. We can't see them very easily. and these white sepals with pinkish backs, very attractive. The leaves are sort of three-part again with some deep toothing, and they form these little patches under the trees. And also very familiar, I'm sure, is primrose, with these great yellow flowers with the notched petals, and the leaves are very rough looking, rugose and crinkly. Primrose are a fascinating plant. The seeds have got what's called an elaiosome on them, which is basically a bribe made of proteins and fats for ants. So when the seeds drop off, the ants pick up the seeds and carry them away to their nests, and eat the elaiosome, and the seed hopefully germinates. So it's like a little bribery system. So moving from our neutral woodlands into our more basic woodlands, we're going to start coming across Dog's Mercury. Another really interesting plant. It's dioecious, which means it has separate male and separate female plants. So if you look at the flowers, you can work out whether your plant is male or female or not. It's a highly poisonous species, so please don't eat it. And this is one of the ones where, unfortunately, I've got a bit British-centred, because it's quite unusual in most of Ireland, I think. So my apologies for that. Substituted in for something that you know is there. Another classic basic woodland plant is ramsons, or wild garlic. It does, of course, smell deliciously garlicky and taste deliciously garlicky as well. You can use it to make pesto, the leaves. And the name ramsons comes from the Old English hramza. No idea if I said that right. The Old English hramza, which means garlic. So there you go. And I think my last basic woodland plant, although it does occur more broadly as well, and you do find it even in gardens, is wood avens, this beautiful little member of the rose family with yellow petals, and it tends to look upwards with its flowers. They tend to look upwards. Here on the right is its seed head, and it has all of these. Each structure has got a little hook on the end. It's designed to hook onto the passing animals and distribute its seeds in that way. So you often do find it along the sides of paths and so forth. So moving from dry to a damper woodland, I've gone from wood avens to water avens. And as you can see here, the flowers of this closely related plant point down. They tend to droop over, and they're much pinker as well, usually. The leaves are similar in shape, but the terminal lobe, the end bit here, is much bigger and broader and more rounded in the water avens. The two species do hybridize. So if you find one that's kind of looking not up or down, but kind of straight ahead, a bit intermediate, maybe you found the hybrid. Another quite familiar plant, this is yellow iris, and although of course it grows in marshes as pictured here, it's also a common plant in wet woodlands, where it can form really nice swards underneath more open areas of willow. The leaves are quite distinctive as well. They're sort of sword-like, held kind of side on to the plant. So even when it's out of flower, it's fairly easy to recognize. Out in the Outer Hebrides, you get kind of yellow iris grassland, which is a sort of damp grassland on the edges of the Maca and so forth, which is absolutely wonderful, and it's a really important habitat for corncrake. So they can sing from there completely concealed, and you'll never see them, but you can hear them singing away inside the iris beds. And this, a much smaller plant this time, but with a long name, the opposite-leaved golden saxifrage. So it's a member of the saxifrage family, and it does have, going up the stem, these opposite leaves in sort of paired up paired opposites there. And of course, naturally, there is an alternate leaved golden saxifrage to confuse it with, where the leaves are alternately spaced rather than opposite. And you tend to find this in woodlands forming these little carpets where there's groundwater movement down a slope. So you often see it on the sides of riparian valleys where they're wooded and the water's kind of flushing down. And you get these beautiful little carpets of tiny yellow flowers. It's quite an early flower, so it's out now, looking really good. So we whistle-stopped our way through woodland, now on to grasslands. And this is another group of habitats where the plant assemblages are very strongly linked to the soil conditions, particularly the pH and how grazed they are as well also affects the species that occur. Very broadly speaking, acid grasslands are the commonest ones in the grazed uplands. Neutral grasslands are the commonest ones in the lowlands, where they tend to be grazed or sometimes mown. And calcareous grasslands, the more basic grasslands, are found in the uplands and on the lowlands, on thin basic soils, mostly dry. And they're usually short and grazed, although particularly in the south of England, you do get some tall chalk downland habitats as well. So my first flower from the acid grassland in this instance is the heath bedstraw. So it's a bedstraw, member of the bedstraw family. That means it's got a square stem and the leaves are held in whorls around the stem, which you can see in the bottom right there. And it's got these super little white flowers with 4 petals held in a cross. There are a few very similar looking white bedstraws, but they tend to differ in habitat, which is helpful. The limestone bedstraw is found on calcareous grasslands. Heath bedstraw is more acidic. The marsh bedstraw is more marshy, etc. So habitat can be quite a useful pointer towards identification of confusing plants sometimes. To really be sure, you need to get a hand lens and have a little look at the margins of the leaves to see which way the teeth are pointing. But I'll leave that to you. Another common plant in acid grasslands is this guy, the tormental. Remember the rose family again, but with 4 petals rather than the typical 5 of the roses. The leaves are formed in groups of 3. Although it can sometimes look like more because as a member of the roses, it has what we call stipules, which are sort of leaf-like things at the base of the leaves. So you could easily think it might have 5. But yeah, it's a very common plant in acid grassland. It also grows across a different range of habitats as well, and you will find it in wet bogs. Growing through the bog plants, so it's does really well. It does tormental. It's found all over, and of course it's grassland. So I better put a grass in. Cue screams and howls. This is one of the easiest grasses to identify when you get out there. This is mat grass. It's wiry and forms tough tussocks. Goes white in the winter and stands out. In the spring, these are the inflorescences here, these kind of purple looking things. And when you see them closely, you see that they're actually one-sided. So each little flowering spikelet sticks out on one side and not the other. They're quite sharp and pointy. They're absolutely ideal for sticking in your woolly socks and making your ankles itch. And yeah, once you get your eye in for it, it's an easy one to spot. The mat grass. Moving to more neutral soils, another grass here that is asymmetric in its inflorescence is the crested dog's tail. And you can see in the top right photo that all of the little spikelets are coming off on one side and then zip, it's flat down the left side there. So it's another asymmetric one. Grasses, definitely flowering plants. Look at all of those anthers sticking out there. Isn't that fantastic? But yeah, so this crested dog's tail is a very common grass. in meadows, hay meadows. And it also gets seeded in semi-improved grassland, where the farmers, the landowners, are trying to improve the grazing for their livestock. So you'll definitely come across this one, and it is easy to spot when you see its flowers. Another famous meadow plant is yellow rattle. So this has got these wonderful fused yellow petaled flowers, and the base of it here, the sepals that are fused together to form what we call a calyx. When the plant goes to seed, that calyx inflates and the seeds rattle around in it, which is where, of course, yellow rattle comes from. So on the meadow here, all of these brown plants in the foreground, they're yellow rattle that's gone to seed. So if you walk through it, there'll be this rattling sound all around you as your feet brush them, which is rather wonderful. It's also known colloquially as the meadow maker, because it's a semi-parasitic plant. It parasitizes grasses, particularly big, tall, rough grasses, which opens up the sward a bit more and allows more flowering plants, more species to survive and grow there. So quite a useful plant to boost meadow diversity. Common knapweed, beautiful flower. Another member of the daisy family, would you believe it? Mostly with the outer ray florets missing, and it's got these kind of elongated disc florets in the middle there. It looks like a thistle, but with no spikes, basically. And the leaves are not spiky at all. There are several species of knapweed, and they can be an absolute nightmare to tell apart. But that's okay. You can just amalgamate them all together and say, common knapweed ag. If you look at these wonderful structures here that look quite brown, if you get them in your hands, they're actually sort of like a triangle with teeth on either side, a bit like that. And the size of those teeth compared to the size of in shape of those teeth, it helps you identify the species. Right, so moving from neutral grassland to calcareous grassland, which is often the one people are most excited about because it's the least common and it often includes rarer plants. This is an absolute staple of calcareous grassland. This is wild thyme, and it has a square stem with the two opposite sides very hairy, and these two opposite sides glabrous, which is very distinctive. And these lovely pinkish flowers, and you'll notice that the leaves are sort of in opposite pairs. Lots of other plants are called thyme-leaved something or other, and usually they have leaves that are arrayed in that way. So thyme-leaved speedwell, thyme-leaved sandwood, and so forth. So yeah, quite useful to see. You'll very often see this with it, common bird's foot trefoil. This is a member of the pea family again, so it's got this kind of wings, standard and keel structure to the flower. It's called a trefoil, but it actually has 5 leaflets to the leaf, but 3 of them are held up above the others, so it looks like a 3 leaflets to the leaf. And the bird's foot comes from these seed pods down in the right-hand corner, which look like the toes of a water bird or a crow or something like that. And my grass choice for calcareous grassland is this one, the quaking grass, which is absolutely gorgeous. These drooping spikelets quiver in the wind, and they're just, it just looks beautiful. Once you see it in flower like this, there's nothing else that you would mistake it for in a semi-natural grassland. And it's come up, there's all kinds of wonderful evocative names to describe it. So some of my favorites are doddering dillies, jiggle joggles, shaky tremleys, and totter grass. Well, it's fantastic grass with fantastic names. Right, so grasslands are down, heaths and bogs my peatland habitats. So what's the difference between a heath and a bog? Well, it's about what they're on. Dry, shallow peat gives you dry heaths. Wet, shallow peat gives you wet heaths. And on deep peat, over 50 centimetres usually, you get bogs. And bogs are a kind of wetland that get most of their water from rainfall. So globally, they're restricted to cool, wet places. So Britain and Ireland, very important for bogs. We generally class them in two ways. Blanket bogs, which are mainly upland, on sloping or flat areas, and raised bogs, which are mainly lowland, that develop over time as kind of convex, a dome-like profile. Because they're lowland, they're now quite rare because lots of them have been lost to peat cutting and conversion to agriculture. And in the uplands, burning and grazing and draining are all threats to bog and heath habitats. So starting off on the dry heaths with a very familiar plant, heather. And this has these pink flowers, usually pink, running up the stem rather than clustered together at the top. The petals are only fused at the base, and the leaves are very small and opposite. Contrast that with the bell heather, where the petals are fused into this fantastic bell, which are much more clustered towards the top of the plant, bigger and more clustered. The leaves here are not opposite, but they're in whorls of 3 sort of shiny dark green leaves without hairs. And if you look at the picture, I think down there in the bottom right, there's heather leaves, and here is bell heather growing. So once you get your eye in, it's very easy to pick out. Another dwarf shrub. These are all dwarf shrubs, I should say, are plants that are woody. Their stems are woody, so they have rigidity to them. This plant is bilberry, or blaeberry as it's known in Scotland. Probably very familiar again. The leaves are green and toothed around the edges, proper leaves like a proper plant, rather than little whirls of needles. Here's the flower, these lovely drooping red bells, and here's the very familiar purpley blue-black bilberry itself, which I'm sure many of us ate as children. So I'm going from dry heath to wet heath now. This is another dwarf shrub. This is the dwarf shrub of wet heaths called cross-leaved heath. And it has this cluster of pale pink flowers at the top, very tightly clustered at the top of the stem, which really stands out, drooping again. And the leaves are kind of grey-green, very hairy, and in whorls of 4 going around the stem. So once you get your eye in, it's very easy to spot the difference between this and the bell heather. This one tends to be in the wet heaths. You do get heather and occasionally bell heather in wet heaths as well, and vice versa. But habitat is a good indicator for them, and vice versa. Here is a sedge. I know it's called deer grass, but it's actually a kind of sedge, typical. So this forms quite firm tussocks. It's very tufted. It has leaves, but they're right at the bottom of the stem, so it kind of looks leafless. And up comes the stem to a terminal flowering spike with these brown structures, and there's the anthers and whatnot sticking out the top. It's also quite easily recognizable in the winter because it retains these brownish stems, so you get little tussocks of brown stems with the head gone, that are still recognizable as deer grass. My final wet heath plant is this guy, purple moor grass. And this is a big, tall, robust grass that forms big tussocks. And if you've ever been walking off a path in a wet heath area with lots of purple moor grass, you'll know how challenging and painful it can be because the tussocks are unstable and difficult to walk your way through. In the early flowering, it has these kind of reddish purple inflorescences, which I think is where it gets its name. Later in the season, the plant turns this beautiful kind of gingery beige, and then later even whiter, which is quite distinctive. So once you get your eye in, you can spot it based on colour. And a good feature for it is that its ligule in the bottom right there is just a series of hairs rather than a membrane like most grasses are. So its ligule is made up of hairs. Purple moorgrass. So moving now from my wet shallow peat to my wet deep peat, I'm hitting the bogs. This is Flanders moss, I think Britain's biggest raised bog, here in Stirlingshire where I live. And if you look across that picture, you can spot the tussocks of heather, possibly heather, and crossleaf heath in this matrix of green, kind of yellowishy green. And that yellowishy green is hare's tail cottongrass tussocks. It's not a grass, it's a sedge, sorry. But it's a very distinctive one. It forms these really big tussocks, long, wiry, triangular leaves in cross-section. And on the flowers here are unmistakable. A single flower head on the end of the stem, with these wonderful white fluffy hairs coming off the top, making the hare's tail. If it has more than one fluffy pom-pom at the end of the stem, then it won't be this species. It'll be a different species of cottongrass, probably the common cottongrass. Now, this is a beautiful plant. This is bog asphodel, often confused for an orchid. It does have that kind of orchid look about it. In fact, in the picture I've just noticed there's a heath fragrant orchid, I think, there. But this is actually in its own family. It used to be part of the lily family. It's got these wonderful flowers, beautiful yellow. And the leaves are flat and held sort of side on, coming from the base in a kind of curved sword-like, a little bit like an iris. It's like a mini iris leaf. So even if it's not in flower, you see the leaves and they're very distinctive. My first carnivorous plant of the evening, this is round leaf sundew. The leaves are, of course, round and they're covered in these glandular hairs, long hairs with a sticky gland globule at the end for catching their food. I've shown a photograph of the flower open here, this little white thing, but actually often the flowers don't open and the plant self-pollinates. So bogs are a kind of wetland, but going a bit broader. Wetlands as a category can include absolutely everything from aquatic plants in deep water to rush pastures or mires made of that purple moorgrass. And how you classify them depends a lot on asking where does the water come from and where is it going. So a spring, the water comes out of the ground. A flush, it's either surface water or more usually groundwater moving, usually down a slope. A basin mire at the bottom of a hollow where the water collects and is trapped and there isn't much going out. Fens and marshes where the soil is saturated without a huge amount of movement. Soakaways where the water disappears. Inundation habitats where the water comes in and goes away again. You get the picture. And the other thing when you're classifying them is thinking about the pH of the soil. So you can have an acid flush, a neutral flush, or a basic flush. It can get complicated, so I'm going to keep it simple. Going to look at a few aquatics. This is broad-leaved pondweed, probably the commonest lowland pondweed. It's got these nice broad floating leaves, and underneath the water, it has long, thin leaves without any blades. They basically look like the midrib of the leaf, just kind of extending with no blade on either side. There's its flowering head there in the middle. And a good identification feature for broadleaf pondweed is if you take the leaf out of the water, you can see a bend, a hinge at the base of the leaf. And that's a good giveaway that what you've got is the broadleaved pondweed. This is probably familiar to most of you. It's common duckweed. And it's a fantastic little plant. It floats on the surface of the water. It does have a single root here on the right, but most of the time it manages to float on the surface without the root being in the substrate. It's like the albatross of the canal. It never touches the ground, which is rather nice. It mostly, in Britain, mostly reproduces vegetatively. So it grows new bits here that then bud off to form new plants and does it again. Within the family of duckweeds, I think it's the world's smallest flowering plant, which has a flower 0.3 millimeters in size, which is quite something. But I've never seen a duckweed flower, so good luck. And another floating aquatic, this one is the white water lily. It's a very distinctive plant, but if you're looking at ones where the flowers are kind of pinkish or tinted, then you might have a garden escape or released hybrid. So pure white flowers are what to look for. If it's not in flower, these big leaves, you notice the veins are quite prominent, and they kind of come from this point out in a kind of star pattern, rather than coming off like a herringbone from the middle rib, which would make it the yellow water lily. Easy to tell when they're in flower, harder when they're out of flower. So going from the deep water to the edges now, looking at some swamp species. This is water horsetail. And the horsetails are a fascinating group of plants, more closely related to ferns than flowering plants, I think. And this is a direct descendant of calamites plants, which were around in the Carboniferous and form a big part of our coal beds. Except then they were sort of up to 30 meters high. But if you look at fossils of them, they've got the same structure. It's absolutely fascinating. What have we got? We've got this stem with joints coming up, and little round rows of little sheath teeth. Some branches in this species, but it can be completely unbranched, especially when it's in deep water, not in the shade. There's a cone at the top that produces the spores. And in this species, water horsetail, the stem is almost completely hollow. And that's a really good identification feature for it. So take a bit, pull it apart, and if it's hollow and you can look through it like a telescope, it's the water horsetail. Another swamp species, this time a sedge, bottle sedge. To me, the most distinctive feature of it is its colour. It's this grey-green or glaucous. And especially in the uplands, if you see a big sedge growing out of the water, and it's that colour, you know you've got yourself some bottle sedge. Looking here on the left, these are the male spikes, these two up here, and the female spikes lower down, female here, male here. So they look different. And the name bottle sedge comes from the fruits here on the female, which is shaped a bit like a sort of a bottle-shaped flask like that. So yeah, bottle sedge, very common species. And my last swamp plant is the bulrush or reed mace. And again, it's quite an interesting one. It's got this strange shape to the inflorescence. This top bit is the male and the bottom bit is the female. And each of those are absolutely jam-packed with flowers. The leaves are grey and flat and kind of held a bit like a half-open fan at the bottom. Okay, so moving out of the water now and into kind of saturated ground. We've got meadowsweet, which is probably very familiar to most of you. It's a lovely plant, grows very tall and can form dense swards. It's a member of the rose family, and it has these fantastic sort of tufts, cotton candy-like fluffs of flowers, a very distinctive scent, which I think smells quite a lot like antiseptic. It was very popular as a strewing herb in Elizabethan times, where you cut them and threw them on the floor to mask the odours of your bedchamber, shall we say. And it was reputedly the favourite of Queen Elizabeth I. So, royal approval. This beauty is Devil's Bit scabious. It's a fantastic clustered flower head, lots of individual flowers kind of packed in there, beautiful deep blue. And the leaves are mostly basal. They're kind of quite dark with a paler midrib, which when you get your eye in, you can pick out really easily. And it's another great plant with a great backstory. It was thought to be able to treat scabies, and rumor has it that the devil was so angered by the plant and its ability to heal the disease that he'd unleashed upon humanity that he bit its root. And sure enough, if you delve down to the root of the plant, it's black and short, as if it's been bitten off by something hellish. And another plant of marshes, but also flushes, edges of water, all over the place where it's wet, basically, is lesser spearwort. This is a member of the buttercup family, but unlike the buttercups we were looking at earlier, its leaves are linear. They're not branched. They're single, straight leaves coming off. So once you see that and see the straight leaves, you'll know you've got yourself lesser spearwort. I'm going to look at two rushes now quickly, because they are a really important feature of marshes and mires, especially in the uplands where, like this picture here in the center, they can cover huge, great swathes of the hillside. This is sharp flowered rush. And the way it's growing here is very characteristic, because it grows rhizomally. So it forms great big even swards. The flower sits at the top of the plant, this inflorescence at the top of the plant, and the sharp flowered bit is to do with the shape of the tepals, which are the parts of the flower. Its leaves, if you open them up, have transverse cross-sections, like sort of ridges going transversely, a bit like a ladder, which is again very distinctive. Contrast that with this guy, the soft rush, which doesn't have an obvious leaf to pull apart. So if you pull apart the stem, you find that there's pith running all the way up. And it used to be used to make rush lamps with, because the pith was used as a wick to wick the oil. It has a much tighter cluster of flowers in the inflorescence, and it looks like the inflorescence is not perched at the end. It's partway up the stem. In fact, the bit that carries on past it is a sort of a leaf-like structure called a bract. So it is right at the end, but it doesn't look like it. So quite easy to tell apart from the sharp-flowered rush. And it also grows differently as well. It tends to grow in big tussocks, this rush, rather than in a sort of even sward. My last wetland plant tonight is this beautiful butterwort, common butterwort with these fantastic purple flowers and very distinctive kind of lemon yellowy green basal rosettes. And of course the rosettes are sticky and they catch insects because it's carnivorous. It kind of catches, they stick in there and the leaves roll up and digest them. It has a fascinating overwintering strategy. It actually overwinters as a loose bud. So if you find a strange sort of oval yellowish structure in a flush in the mountains and you're not sure what it is, in the wintertime it's probably a butterwort bud. Okay, moving to the coasts. These are dynamic habitats. They're changing and moving with storms. They include the strand line, shingles, sea cliffs, sand dunes and dune slacks, salt marsh, etc. And it's really interesting exercise if you go to the coast, to a sand dune area or a salt marsh area, start at the sea and walk your way inland, and you'll see the plant community starting to change. As you get further from the sea, the substrate gets more stable, the sort of the salt levels decrease, and you'll see different communities come in, which is really interesting. Thrift is a very familiar species, I think, to everybody. It grows on a whole range of habitats, salt marsh and rocks, and everything in between at the coast. You also find it up in the mountains as well, where its adaptations to retain moisture in very stressful conditions are also useful. Another plant on the edge of the sea itself, growing in the sand near the strand line, is this guy. This is sea sandwort. Lovely little thing with these fabulous leaves coming to quite a sharp point, very fleshy, succulent leaves. Again, an adaptation for the salt-rich environment with these pointy things. And if you look closely, you can see that the leaves are arranged in pairs, first that way, then to 90 degrees, then to 90 degrees. And that leaf pattern is the same as the ones in the campion family, which is what this strange little plant belongs to, which they remember the campion or the pinks family. Moving to salt marsh now. This is a very attractive salt marsh plant, the Michaelmas daisy in all but name. This is called sea aster. It has these lovely purplish blue ray florets and little orangey yellow disc florets in the middle. Except if you look on the right here, sometimes you don't get the ray florets, you just have a yellow head there. It's the same species, it's just a variety. The key thing here that distinguishes it from all of the garden Michaelmas daisies is the leaves, and the whole plant is fleshy. It's adaptation to prevent desiccation in the salt marsh environment. And the glassworts, another salt marsh plant, have taken it even further. These are bizarre little things. So we look on the left here, you see it's divided into sections, and at the bottom of each section is this strange set of 3 structures. Those are the flowers. And this fleshy, succulent section here, that's a pair of opposite leaves that are fused together around the stem. So when you find glasswort, take it apart and look at the bizarre structure. Find that central stem. It blows my mind that these are leaves, but there they are. They come in lots of different colors and forms. They're very hard to identify down to species, so it doesn't matter. We just say glassworts. Incidentally, this is the same thing that you can buy in restaurants known as samphire. So you can have a little munch whilst you're out there. Hint, they taste salty. Going on to sand dunes. This is a dune building species, stabilizes the sand and starts to help create the dunes. This is marram, the grass of the sand dunes. Its leaves are strong and tough and wiry, and they're enrolled. So the leaves are rolled right round in on themselves to prevent water loss. The inflorescence, sort of very long and quite pale, a very distinctive plant. This is maybe a little bit less familiar, but it's another sand dune species that can help pioneer into open sand. This is the sand sedge, and it has a cluster of heavy spikelets at the end, male at the top, female at the bottom, and typically that heavy cluster pulls it over and it nods, and that nodding inflorescence I find quite a useful indicator. Oh yeah, that could be sand sedge. It grows along using rhizomes, and so it often grows in straight lines. And if you look in the bottom left picture there, these are the lines of growth of the sand sedge pioneering into sand. Absolutely brilliant to see its growth form writ large like that. Beautiful. And my last group of habitats, we're nearly there, is mountains. Now, of course, the climate there is cold and wet. You get late snow lie, and that allows species at the southern limit of the European range, like Arctic alpines, to grow. And they're really special habitats. We have montane forms of grassland, heathland, and even woodland with the montane willow scrub. Interesting features are crags, ledges, and flushes. And often grazing pressure will restrict certain plants or vegetation communities to ledges. So you'll see a whole different set of plants there on the ledge compared to at the base of the crag. And before grazing pressure was so high, those ledge plants would probably be in a herb-rich sward at the base of the crag as well. So 3 plants to go. Alpine Lady's Mantle, absolutely gorgeous, staple of montane grasslands. It's got these wonderful palmate leaves with delightful silvery, silky hairs underneath, and these fun little pom-poms of flowers up at the top. Really attractive, one of my favourite plants. Always a good sign. Sometimes you find it washed down rivers, so you might find it at lower altitudes. You get some interesting plants in river shingles. Here's a club moss. Like the horsetail earlier, it's more closely related to ferns, and it was around in the Carboniferous, so its ancestors were 320 million years ago, but much bigger. And we see fossils of plants that were related to the club mosses in mining spoils in central Scotland. It's sort of branched, upright, erect, quite tough. And these little yellow spots here, these are where the spores are. The sporangia kind of tucked in against the stem in the leaf axils. This is probably the commonest club moss you'll encounter in the uplands. So it's a good one to start with. There are several other species. And last, definitely not least, one of my favourite plants, the starry saxifrage, so called because it looks like little white stars. Growing on wet rocks, in flushes, on wet gravels in the uplands. It has a basal rosette, and then a stalk with no leaves at all that branches to reach this beautiful flower, and each petal has got 2 yellow spots on. So once you see it, it's absolutely beautiful plant, well worth a look. Okay, so we did it. 60 species by habitat. We've made it through. So here's the challenge. Can you find all 60 of these as part of your 100 plants challenge? I think this is a really fun way to explore habitats that you might otherwise not visit. But I would warn you that your 100 plants challenge might become a 200 plants challenge and a 300, because it's addictive stuff and there's so much out there. Other resources, I think this field guide, the Collins Wildflower Guide, is really helpful. And of course, it covers the sedges and rushes as well, which I've included in my talk. Flora Incognita, using plant identification apps, no problem with that. Just make sure you retain a little bit of caution and double check things. And of course, hand lenses are really valuable once you start looking properly, looking carefully. I use this one at the bottom, which has got a little light in it, which makes it much easier to see things sometimes. And finally, thanks to everybody whose photographs I stole. Most of them are available on the BSBI online plant atlas, which is a fabulous resource. So if you want to catch up with them and have an explore, look there. Thank you very much for listening, and happy hunting.
Wow. Thanks, Matt. That was amazing. I lost track of time. The time just disappeared as you were going through all those plants. We could have done 100 in 100 minutes easily. Thank you so much. And I think we've had some comments to that effect and say people absolutely loving it, that whole sort of wonderful tour through the habitats and the key species there. So really, thank you so much. Before we get to the questions, Matt, I just wanted to quickly remind everybody about our Padlet. So I've popped the link in the chat. So the Padlet is where we are trying to collate many of the questions from all the sessions. So do go have a look at that. Lots of resources. Don't forget to check our website. Also, next week's webinar, next Wednesday on the 8th of April, will be all about the where of the record, mapping and grid references. And hopefully, if you have any sort of questions about that or any understanding, want to get more detailed understanding of how to find grid references and how they work, then do attend there. So I'm going to look at some questions, Matt, if you don't mind. So I think one of the first ones, which probably be good to start with, is what is a sedge? And how is it different to a grass and a rush?
Oh my goodness, you're quite right. What is a sedge? Well, my fun way of remembering it is that sedges have edges. They're a kind of plant that has typically has sort of triangular stems Well, yeah, what exactly is a sedge? It's a fabulous question. So the stems are solid, they're three-angled, and not always, but usually the male and the female parts of the flower are separated out into different spikes, different inflorescences. The flower structures themselves are unique. With grasses, for example, each grass flower is held by a pair of glooms, essentially hands kind of clasping it and keeping it safe. Sedges have done away with one of those. They just sit their seed bit or their flower bit underneath one like that. So once you get your eye in, there are a few features of it that of the sedges that you can that are universal to the group. So the deer grass inside the flower, it only has one gloom holding each bit of the. So inside the spikelet, the spike, it only has one gloom holding each flower. But
Wonderful.
yeah, I literally reached for my book then because it threw me.
Well,
Great
I think,
question.
yeah, there's a nice webinar on sedges for beginners, sedges, rushes, whatever for beginners on the BSBI YouTube channel. So do have a look for that one. I think it goes through all the details there and some common species too, which is wonderful. Thanks, Matt.
I should
Okay.
probably do watch that as well.
It was a brilliant introduction. So the nice comparison between those three groups, grasses, rushes, and sedges. Someone was asking Jane about ancient woodland indicators. So what are those, and do you have some examples to share?
Yeah, of course. So ancient woodland indicator plants are a group of plants that we think indicate that the woodland is at least old, so ancient, semi-natural. And some of the plants that I used in my talk are indicators. So the wild garlic, the dog's mercury, some of the ferns that you get, hard shield fern, wood anemone. I think it's worth stressing the word indicator. So the presence of them doesn't necessarily mean that you're in an ancient woodland. And certainly in Scotland, where a lot of the hillsides used to be wooded, and we don't have trees there anymore, you still find plants like bluebell and wood anemone, the remnants of these ancient ground floras that are now woodlandless. So that it's fascinating to understand that and see how the changes have come about. You can look at, there is a paper that I think you can find online which identifies a full list of ancient woodland indicator species by region as well.
Great, thank you. And then you've created the resource with all these plants that you've had on your list, which we will share as part of the Padlet afterwards, and some of the slides from Matt's presentation. So thank you for that. That's a wonderful resource to have and to link to. But I also wanted to ask you, obviously these plants that you've listed, many of them aren't yet in flower. Do you have a way that people can check when they will be in flower? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, well, just double checking my Collins Wildflower Guide here. Yes, that has the flower. There we go. It's in two pieces now because I've used it so much.
You've broken it.
Yeah. I don't know if all flower guides do, but certainly this one has a flowering time window. So it'll say like April to March. Very broadly speaking, though, with habitats, you can work out the season to visit because the first season comes to woodlands because the ground flora tends to flower before the trees come into leaf, so that it can take advantage of the sunlight before the canopy shades down the ground flora. So I tend to go woodlands, grasslands, heathlands. And the heathland kind of season can go right through into September. That said, so can the coastal season. So salt marshes, some of those plants, I was looking at the salt marshes for particularly the glassworts. They're best looked for in the early autumn because they turn cool colours, and the cool colours help you work out which one is which. Not always, but yeah. So I would say go woodland. Urban you can do all year round because of the urban heat island effect. So it's a great place to go now and start ticking things off. But then I'd go woodland, grassland, heathland, and the aquatic season is sort of summer through to autumn as well. So yeah, that's probably your calendar for botany by habitat.
And then there's a nice resource on the Plant Atlas. It's got a phenology tab for each species as well, which shows you very detailed information about when things are in flower, depending on your latitude as well. So I think that can change content. So.
Yeah, you can geek out totally to that. Although
Yeah.
the data isn't completely up to date, so things are
Yeah.
tending to flower a bit earlier.
Yeah. Climate change is obviously changing things in it. But yeah, a good start. And then the book that Matt is showing you, that Collins Guide, I think the ones that we've been recommending to most people in this challenge is the British and Irish Wildflowers and Plants Pocket Guide, little one with common species. And that's got a nice little phenology flowering time thing as well, which I think has come from the Plant Atlas as well. So yeah, lots of opportunities there. Okay, one more question and then we will end it for tonight. Then one was asking about, it was around the bogs, describing a floating bog. I don't know, do you know
Oh
that?
yeah. Yes, you can have floating vegetation mats called sort of floating mires. I'm trying to quaking mires. That's it. Quaking mires is the technical-ish term. Where the peat underneath is so saturated, it's essentially liquid. So when you walk along the top, it goes, and you desperately hope that you aren't quite weighty enough to puncture the skin of the bog and sink right in. But I mean, they're wonderful habitats. They're quite hard to get to, but you get all kinds of weird and wonderful sedges and fantastic for sphagnum mosses and all sorts of other things as well.
Great. And I loved your list of wonderful names for quaking grass. And I think to end on the evening, can you remind us those ones and then we'll finish up? Do you remember the list?
Yeah. I'm good to.
I thought they were so cute.
They are wonderful. I wrote them down because I knew I'd forget some of them.
Yeah.
With all these plants to try and remember and share, and
I know.
everything. There we go. Okay. Doddering dillies, jiggle joggles, shaky tremleys, which I think is a Shetland one, which is rather nice. And finally, tottergrass.
Right. We'll end it there, everybody. Thank you so much, Matt. That was wonderful. And have a wonderful evening, everybody. Goodbye.